David Parker stared at the pink slip in his hands, reading the same words over and over again. Due to budget cuts and project delays, your employment is terminated effective immediately. The construction company he'd worked for over the past 4 years was letting him go, just 3 weeks before Christmas. His hand shook slightly as he folded the paper and shoved it into his jacket pocket. The December wind cut through his worn work boots as he walked across the job site parking lot for the last time. His old Ford pickup truck sat there looking as tired as he felt. The blue paint had faded to a dull gray, and rust spots decorated the wheel wells like unwanted Christmas ornaments. But it still ran mostly, and that's all that mattered right now. David climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed and sputtered before finally catching. He sat there for a moment, trying to figure out how he was going to tell 8-year-old Lily that Christmas might be different this year. Very different. The drive home took him through the nicer part of town, where houses were already decorated with twinkling lights and inflatable snowmen. Families were probably inside, warm and happy, not worrying about next month's rent or whether the electricity would get shut off. David felt that familiar knot in his stomach, the one that had been his constant companion since his wife Rachel died 3 years ago. Everything had been different when Rachel was alive. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and together they made enough to live comfortably. Not rich, but comfortable. They had plans. A bigger house, maybe another child, family vacations. Then cancer took all of that away in just 8 months. The insurance money had helped for a while, but medical bills and funeral costs ate through most of it. David had to take time off work to care for Rachel during her illness, then more time to help Lily adjust afterward. His old job understood, but construction work doesn't wait for anyone. Projects get delayed, budgets get cut, and guys like David become expendable. He pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex. The building wasn't much to look at. The brick walls needed repointing, and half the mailboxes had broken doors. But it was home, and the rent was something he could almost afford. Almost being the key word. David climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment, his work boots heavy on each step. He could hear the television through the thin walls of the neighboring unit. Mrs. Chen was probably watching her evening game shows. She'd been kind to them since Rachel died, sometimes watching Lily when David had to work late. He opened the apartment door to find Lily sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by homework papers. Her brown hair fell across her face as she concentrated on her math problems. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that David's heart ached. "Hey, kiddo," he said, trying to keep his voice normal. "How was school today?" Lily looked up with a bright smile that could light up the whole apartment. "It was good. We're making Christmas cards for people at the nursing home. Mrs. Rodriguez says we're spreading holiday cheer." She held up a construction paper card decorated with glittery snowflakes. "This one's for you, Daddy." David took the card and felt his throat tighten. In Lily's careful second-grade handwriting it read, "To the best daddy in the world. You make everything better." A little stick figure drawing showed the two of them holding hands under a Christmas tree. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he managed to say. "The most beautiful card I've ever seen." Lily beamed and went back to her homework. David walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. A half-gallon of milk, some leftover mac and cheese from 2 nights ago, a few apples, and not much else. He'd been planning to go grocery shopping tomorrow with his paycheck. Now that paycheck wasn't coming. He sat down at their small kitchen table and pulled out his wallet. $37 and some change. That was it until he could find another job. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and he was already behind on the electric bill. The notice had come last week, giving him until the end of the month to pay or face disconnection. David had always been proud. He'd never asked for handouts, never wanted charity. Even after Rachel died, when well-meaning friends and family offered help, he'd politely declined. He was Lily's father, and fathers provided for their children. That's just how it worked. But pride doesn't pay bills, and it definitely doesn't put food on the table. He heard Lily humming in the living room, working on her homework without a care in the world. She trusted him completely to take care of everything. That trust was both the most precious thing in his life and the heaviest burden he carried. The apartment was getting cold. David had been keeping the thermostat low to save money, and with the old windows and poor insulation, warmth leaked out as fast as the ancient heating system could pump it in. He grabbed an extra blanket from the closet and brought it to Lily. "Here you go, kiddo. Don't want you getting cold while you work. Thanks, Daddy. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a cape. Are we having spaghetti again tonight? David's heart sank. They'd been eating a lot of spaghetti lately because it was cheap and filling. Lily never complained, but he knew she must be getting tired of it. How about we see what else we can find? He said, though he already knew the answer. As evening fell, David helped Lily with her homework at the kitchen table. She was working on a story about what she wanted for Christmas. Most kids her age would be writing about video games or expensive toys. Lily's list was different. I want Daddy to be happy, she read aloud. And I want it to snow so we can build a snowman. And maybe some new colored pencils because mine are getting small. David felt that familiar sting behind his eyes. His daughter was asking for colored pencils while other kids wanted iPads and designer clothes. She was so grateful for everything, never demanding or whining about what they didn't have. After Lily went to bed, David sat at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, looking at the classified ads on his phone. Construction jobs were scarce in winter, especially in their small Michigan town. Most companies were cutting back until spring, not hiring. He'd applied to 12 different places in the past month and gotten exactly 0 callbacks. Tomorrow he had an interview at a warehouse across town. The pay was less than construction work, but it was something. He'd take anything at this point. Anything to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator. The weather forecast was calling for a major snowstorm tomorrow night. David hoped it wouldn't interfere with his interview. His old truck didn't handle snow very well, and he couldn't afford for anything else to go wrong right now. He looked at Lily's Christmas card on the refrigerator and made a silent promise. Somehow he'd figure this out. He'd find a way to make Christmas special for her, even if it meant working 3 jobs or swallowing his pride and asking for help. Outside, the first few snowflakes were already starting to fall. The warehouse interview had been a disaster. David sat in his truck in the parking lot, staring at the building where he'd just spent 20 minutes being told he was overqualified for a job that paid $12 an hour. Overqualified, that was a fancy way of saying they thought he'd quit the moment something better came. Along, the sky had turned an ugly gray color, and snowflakes were starting to fall harder now. The weather forecast had been right about the storm coming, but it looked like it was arriving earlier than expected. David turned the key in his ignition and the old Ford coughed before finally starting. He needed to get home to Lily before the roads got too bad. The drive from the warehouse took him along Highway 47, a winding 2-lane road that connected the industrial part of town to the residential areas. It wasn't the fastest route, but it was the one his truck handled best. The heater was barely working, and David could see his breath in the cold air inside the cab. As he drove, the snow began falling heavier. What had started as light flakes was turning into a real blizzard. David gripped the steering wheel tighter and slowed down. His truck didn't have the best tires, and the last thing he needed was to slide off the road and end up stuck himself. He was thinking about how he'd break the news of another failed interview to Lily when he saw something through the swirling snow ahead, a dark shape on the side of the road that didn't belong there. As he got closer, David realized it was a car, a nice one by the looks of it, sitting at an odd angle in a snowdrift. David's first instinct was to keep driving. He had his own problems, and getting involved with someone else's trouble was the last thing he needed right now. But as he passed the car, he caught sight of someone inside and his conscience got the better of him. He pulled over about 50 feet ahead and put on his hazard lights. The snow was coming down so hard now that visibility was getting dangerous. David grabbed his winter coat from the passenger seat and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him immediately, cutting through his jacket like it was made of paper. He had to squint to see as he walked back toward the stranded vehicle. It was a black sedan, expensive looking. Definitely not the kind of car you'd expect to see broken down on a back road like this. David knocked on the driver's side window, and it rolled down to reveal an older woman, probably in her 60s with silver hair and worried eyes. She was dressed nicely, too nicely for being stuck in a snowstorm. Her hands were shaking, though whether from cold or fear, David couldn't tell. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked, having to raise his voice over the wind. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, relief flooding her voice. "I've been stuck here for over an hour. My phone has no signal, and I was starting to worry that no one would come by." David looked at the situation. Her car was buried pretty deep in the snowdrift, but It didn't look impossible to get out. "Let me see what I can do," he said. "I've got a rope in my truck. Maybe I can pull you free." "Are you sure? I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all," David said, though he was already thinking about how much gas this was going to cost him, gas money he didn't really have. He went back to his truck and dug around in the bed until he found his tow rope. It was old and frayed in a couple places, but it should hold. David had used it before to help neighbors and friends who'd gotten stuck. Rachel used to tease him about being unable to drive past anyone who needed help. The wind was getting worse and the snow was piling up fast. David worked quickly, attaching one end of the rope to his truck's trailer hitch and the other to the sedan's front bumper. The woman watched from inside her car, occasionally rolling down the window to check on his progress. "Okay," David called out when he'd finished. "I'm going to try to pull you out. Keep your car in reverse and give it a little gas when I start pulling." He climbed back into his truck and put it in low gear. The old Ford's engine groaned as David slowly pressed the accelerator. For a moment nothing happened. Then he felt the rope go taut and both vehicles lurched slightly. He gave it a little more gas. With a sudden rush, the sedan broke free from the snowdrift and rolled backward onto the road. David felt a moment of satisfaction. At least something had gone right today. He got out to disconnect the rope and check on the woman. She had climbed out of her car and was brushing snow off her coat. "Thank you so much," she said. "I was really starting to panic. I'm not from around here and I had no idea who to call." "Happy to help," David said. "You should be able to get going now. Just take it slow on these roads." The woman tried to start her car, but nothing happened. She tried again, and David heard the familiar sound of an engine that just wasn't going to cooperate. The cold had probably affected something under the hood. "I don't think it's going to start," she said, looking worried again. David walked over and popped the hood. He didn't see anything obviously wrong, but cars could be finicky in extreme cold. Sometimes they just needed to warm up before they'd run properly. "Look," he said, "this storm is getting really bad. These roads are going to be impassable pretty soon. Why don't I give you a ride somewhere safe? You can call for help once you're out of the weather." The woman hesitated. "I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. It's no problem, really. I live just a few miles from here. You can wait there until the storm passes or until someone can come get you." She looked at her car, then at the increasingly dangerous weather, and nodded. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble." "Not at all. Grab whatever you need from your car." The woman retrieved an expensive-looking purse and a small overnight bag. David helped her into his truck, apologizing for the mess and the lack of heat. "I'm David, by the way," he said as they got back on the road. "Catherine," she replied. "Catherine Wells, and I really can't thank you enough for stopping." "Don't mention it. My wife always said I couldn't drive past someone who needed help. Guess old habits die hard." The drive to David's apartment took longer than usual because of the snow. Catherine was quiet for most of the trip, occasionally commenting on how bad the weather was getting. David found himself wondering what someone like her was doing out on a back road like Highway 47. She seemed like the type who would have a driver, or at least a better car for winter weather. When they reached the apartment complex, David parked as close to the building as he could. The snow was already several inches deep and showed no signs of stopping. "I should warn you," David said as they climbed the stairs to his apartment. "It's not much, and my daughter's probably doing homework, so it might be a bit chaotic." "I'm just grateful to be somewhere warm and safe," Catherine said. David opened the apartment door to find Lily exactly where he'd left her, sprawled on the living room floor with her homework. She looked up when they came in, her eyes wide with curiosity at seeing a stranger. "Lily, this is Mrs. Wells," David said. "Her car broke down in the storm, so she's going to wait here until it's safe to travel." Lily immediately jumped up, her natural friendliness taking over. "Hi, do you want some hot chocolate?" "Daddy taught me how to make it myself." Catherine's face softened as she looked at the little girl. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. I'm very cold." As Lily bustled off to the kitchen to make hot chocolate, David helped Catherine out of her wet coat. She looked around the small apartment, taking in the mismatched furniture and Lily's artwork on the refrigerator. "You have a lovely home," she said, and something in her voice made David think she really meant it. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small apartment, something was beginning that would change all their lives forever. Lily returned from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she tried not to spill. She handed one to Catherine with the careful formality that 8-year-olds use when trying to impress adults. "I put extra marshmallows in yours," Lily announced proudly. "Daddy says marshmallows make everything better." Catherine accepted the mug with both hands, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "Your daddy is absolutely right about that." She took a sip and smiled. "This is delicious. You're quite the chef." Lily beamed and plopped down on the couch next to Catherine. "Daddy taught me lots of things. He can fix cars and make pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse and read all the hard words in my books." David felt his cheeks warm. "Lily, let Mrs. Wells drink her cocoa in peace. She's had a rough evening." "It's perfectly fine," Catherine said, patting the couch cushion. "I love hearing about all the things your daddy teaches you." Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the old glass in its frames. David went to check the weather on his phone. The storm was even worse than predicted, with whiteout conditions and wind gusts over 40 miles per hour. Nobody was going anywhere tonight. "Looks like you might be stuck here for a while," David said apologetically. "The roads are completely closed. Even the snowplows have stopped running." Catherine nodded, seeming surprisingly unbothered by the news. "I've certainly been in worse places during storms." "You can take my bed," David offered quickly. "I'll sleep on the couch. It's not much, but the sheets are clean." "Absolutely not," Catherine said firmly. "You've already done far too much. The couch will be fine for me. Daddy always gives up his bed for company," Lily chimed in. "Mommy used to say he was too polite for his own good." An awkward silence fell over the room. David hadn't mentioned his wife, and he saw Catherine's expression shift to one of understanding and sympathy. "Your mommy sounds like she was a very smart lady," Catherine said gently to Lily. "She was the best mommy in the whole world," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She's in heaven now, but Daddy says she still watches over us." David cleared his throat. "Lily, why don't you show Mrs. Wells your homework while I see what we have for dinner?" As Lily eagerly spread her schoolwork across the coffee table, David retreated to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator and stared at its meager contents. The leftover mac and cheese, a few eggs, some bread that was starting to get stale. Not exactly the kind of meal you serve to unexpected guests. He could hear Lily chattering away in the living room, telling Catherine about her school project on penguins. Catherine asked thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in every detail. David found himself listening to their conversation as he tried to figure out how to make their simple food stretch for 3 people. "Penguins are really good daddies," Lily was explaining. "The daddy penguin takes care of the egg while the mommy goes to find food. And when the baby hatches, both parents take turns feeding it and keeping it warm." "That sounds like a very good system," Catherine replied. "Teamwork is important in families. Me and Daddy are a team too," Lily said. "We take care of each other. Daddy makes sure I do my homework and eat my vegetables, and I help him remember to smile when he's sad." David paused in his dinner preparations. He hadn't realized Lily noticed when he was struggling. Kids were more observant than adults gave them credit for. "That sounds like a very special partnership," Catherine said softly. David decided on scrambled eggs and toast. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. As he cooked, he found himself stealing glances at Catherine and Lily. Despite coming from what was obviously a very different world, Catherine seemed completely at ease sitting on their second-hand couch, listening to an 8-year-old talk about penguins. "Daddy, can Mrs. Wells see my Christmas card collection?" Lily called out. "If she wants to," David replied, though he felt a twinge of embarrassment. Lily's collection was mostly handmade cards from school and a few store-bought ones from previous years that she'd saved. Lily disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a shoebox. She settled back next to Catherine and began carefully displaying her treasures. Each card had a story, and Catherine listened to everyone with the same attention she might give to a business presentation. "This one is from my friend Amy at school. She moved away, but she still sends me cards. And this one I made for Daddy last year. See, that's supposed to be him fixing his truck." Catherine examined the crayon drawing with serious consideration. "I can tell that's your daddy. You captured his kind eyes perfectly." David felt something shift inside his chest. This woman, whoever she really was giving his daughter the gift of feeling heard and valued. In a world where adults often brushed off children's interests, Catherine was treating Lily's cards like they were precious artifacts. "Dinner's ready," David announced, setting 3 mismatched plates on their small table. They gathered around the table, and David felt suddenly self-conscious about their simple meal. Sorry, it's not much. I wasn't exactly prepared for company. It looks wonderful, Catherine said, and again she sounded like she meant it. I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. Catherine asked about Lily's favorite subjects in school, and listened intently as she described her teacher and classmates. She asked David about his work, and he found himself talking about construction projects he'd enjoyed, carefully avoiding mention of being laid off. Daddy builds really important things, Lily said between bites of scrambled eggs. He helped build the new library downtown. He showed me the bricks he laid. That must be very satisfying work, Catherine said to David. Creating something that will serve the community for years to come. David nodded. It is. There's something about working with your hands, seeing a project come together piece by piece. It's honest work. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Catherine her bedroom. David followed, watching as his daughter proudly displayed her few toys and the pictures she'd drawn that decorated her walls. Catherine examined everything with genuine interest, asking questions about Lily's art and complimenting her on keeping her room so neat. This is my favorite, Lily said, pointing to a drawing taped above her bed. It showed 3 stick figures under a rainbow. That's me, Daddy, and Mommy. Daddy says even though we can't see Mommy anymore, she's still part of our family. Catherine studied the drawing for a long moment. Your daddy is absolutely right. Love doesn't disappear just because someone goes to heaven. As they returned to the living room, David noticed Catherine looking around their apartment with a different expression than before. It wasn't pity or judgment, but something more thoughtful, like she was seeing things through new eyes. You have a beautiful family, she said quietly to David as Lily settled down with a book. Thank you. She's everything to me. It shows. She's confident and kind and curious about the world. That doesn't happen by accident. David felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate. When was the last time someone had noticed what he was trying to do as a father? When someone had seen past their circumstances to the love that held their small family together. The evening passed quietly. Catherine helped Lily with a math worksheet, patiently explaining fractions in a way that made them seem less scary. David found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks, enjoying the sound of laughter and conversation filling their small space. As Lily's bedtime approached, she gave Catherine a spontaneous hug. I'm glad your car got stuck, she said innocently. You're really nice. After tucking Lily into bed, David returned to find Catherine standing by the window, watching the snow continue to fall. The storm showed no signs of letting up. She's remarkable, Catherine said without turning around. You're raising an incredible little girl. I'm trying my best. Some days I worry it's not enough. Catherine turned to face him then, and David was surprised to see tears in her eyes. Trust me when I say this, what you're giving her is worth more than anything money could buy. Something in her voice made David wonder about Catherine's own story. But before he could ask, she had turned back to the window. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their little apartment, something precious was taking root. David woke up to sunlight streaming through the apartment windows and the sound of quiet voices in the kitchen. For a moment, he was confused. Then he remembered. Catherine, the storm, the couch that had served as his bed for the night. His back ached from sleeping on the old cushions, but he'd slept better than he had in weeks. Maybe it was knowing that for one night he wasn't facing his problems alone. He sat up and saw Catherine and Lily at the kitchen table, sharing a breakfast of toast and jam. Catherine was dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, but somehow she still looked elegant, like she belonged in their simple kitchen. Good morning, sleepyhead, Lily called out cheerfully. Mrs. Wells helped me make breakfast. She knows how to cut the crusts off bread just like the fancy restaurants. Sorry if we woke you, Catherine said, standing to pour David a cup of coffee. The storm finally stopped around dawn. It's beautiful outside, but there's quite a bit of snow. David walked to the window and whistled low. The parking lot was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh snow. Cars looked like white lumps scattered around the complex. The roads wouldn't be passable for hours, maybe not until late afternoon. Looks like you're stuck with us a little longer, David said apologetically. There are certainly worse places to be stranded, Catherine replied, and David caught something in her voice, a warmth that seemed to go deeper than politeness. As they finished breakfast, David found himself watching Catherine more carefully. Little things began to add up. The way she carried herself, the expensive watch she wore, the quality of her clothes despite their simple style. Even her speech was different. Educated, confident, like someone used to being listened to. "Can I ask what kind of business you're in?" David said as they cleaned up the breakfast dishes. Catherine paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "I work in technology. Corporate management mostly." It was a vague answer, and David sensed there was more to it. But he didn't push. Everyone had a right to their privacy. Around 10 o'clock, they heard the sound of vehicles outside. David looked out the window and froze. 3 black SUVs had somehow made it through the snow and were parked in front of the building. They looked official, almost like something from a movie. "Are you expecting someone?" David asked Catherine, but when he turned around, her whole demeanor had changed. She was standing straighter, and there was a subtle shift in her expression, like she was preparing for something. Before she could answer, there was a firm knock at the door. David opened it to find a tall man in a dark suit, despite the snow and cold weather. Behind him stood 2 other people, similarly dressed, all looking very serious and very professional. "Ms. Morrison," the man said, his voice respectful but urgent. "We've been searching for you since last night. When your car was found abandoned, we feared the worst." "Ms. Morrison?" David looked back at Catherine, confusion written all over his face. She'd said her name was Catherine Wells. "I'm fine, Robert," Catherine said calmly. "I was rescued by this kind gentleman and his daughter." "David Parker, this is Robert Chen, my head of security." "Head of security?" David felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. "I don't understand," he said slowly. Catherine took a deep breath. "David, I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am. My full name is Catherine Wells Morrison. I'm the founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies." The name hit David like a physical blow. Morrison Technologies. Even someone who didn't follow business news knew that name. They made computer chips and software that went into everything from phones to cars to medical equipment. The company was worth billions. David sank down onto the couch, his mind reeling. You're Catherine Morrison." "The Catherine Morrison?" "I am," she said quietly, sitting down across from him. "And before you say anything, let me explain why I didn't tell you immediately." Lily, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, piped up. "Are you famous, Mrs. Wells?" Catherine smiled gently at her. "In a way, yes, sweetheart. I run a very big company." "Like the boss of everyone?" Lily asked, impressed. "Something like that." David was struggling to process this information. The woman he'd pulled out of a snowdrift, who had slept on his couch and eaten scrambled eggs at his kitchen table, was one of the richest people in the country, maybe the world. "I need some air," David said, standing up abruptly. He walked to the window, his hands shaking slightly. Behind him, he could hear Catherine explaining something to Robert in low tones. "David," Catherine said softly, approaching him, "I know this is a shock." "A shock?" David turned around and all his emotions came pouring out. "You're a billionaire. You could buy this entire apartment complex without thinking about it. And I brought you here to this." He gestured around the small apartment, seeing it suddenly through her eyes. The second-hand furniture, the mismatched dishes, the cracks in the walls they couldn't afford to fix. "To your home," Catherine finished firmly. "You brought me to your home, where you and Lily made me feel more welcome than I've felt anywhere in years. But why didn't you tell me? Your people must have been looking for you. You could have called someone with a helicopter or, I don't know, whatever rich people do in emergencies." Catherine was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Do you want to know the truth? When my car got stuck, my first thought was to call for help. But then you stopped. You didn't know who I was, didn't want anything from me. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped." She paused, looking around the apartment. "When was the last time someone invited me into their home just to be kind? When was the last time someone's child hugged me because they genuinely liked me, not because their parents told them to be nice to the rich lady?" David saw tears forming in Catherine's eyes. "I've been Catherine Morrison, CEO, for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be just Catherine. A person talking to other people, not a business card or a net worth or a photo in a magazine." "But I made you sleep on the couch," David said, still struggling with the reality. "I fed you eggs and toast. You probably eat at 5-star restaurants every night." "David," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger, "I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio. My mother cleaned houses for a living and I wore secondhand clothes to school every day. I know what it's like to worry about whether the electricity will get shut off. This revelation hit David almost as hard as learning her identity. You what? I built my company from nothing. I was 22, living in a studio apartment that cost more than I could afford, eating ramen noodles for dinner and dreaming of changing the world through technology. Catherine's eyes were distant, remembering. Success changed a lot of things in my life, but it didn't change who I am inside. Or at least I hope it didn't. She looked directly at David. Last night, watching you with Lily, seeing the love in this home despite having so little money, it reminded me of something I'd lost. You're the father I remember my mother wishing she could have given me. You're the parent who puts your child's happiness before your own pride. I don't understand, David said, though something in his chest was starting to unclench. When Lily showed me her drawing of your family, when she talked about how you take care of each other, I saw something that all my money has never been able to buy. I saw real wealth, David. The kind that matters. Robert cleared his throat gently. Ms. Morrison, we should discuss your schedule. The board meeting has been moved to this afternoon. Catherine waved him off. Cancel it. Cancel everything for today, ma'am. I said cancel it, Robert. There are more important things than board meetings. She turned back to David, and he saw a determination in her eyes that probably made her very successful in business. David, I want to help you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you've reminded me why I started my company in the first place. To help people build better lives. I don't want charity, David said automatically. Good, Catherine replied with a smile. Because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a partnership. 6 months later, David stood on a patch of muddy ground wearing a hard hat and safety vest that actually fit him properly. The spring morning was crisp and clear, nothing like that snowy December night that had changed everything. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of Clearwater Meadows, the first affordable housing development built by Morrison Community Builders. Nervous? Catherine asked, walking up beside him. She was dressed in business attire but had traded her usual heels for practical boots that could handle the construction site. A little, David admitted, adjusting his tie. It still felt strange wearing a tie to work. But then again, everything about his life felt different now in the best possible way. The months since that snowy night had been a whirlwind. True to her word, Catherine hadn't offered him charity. Instead, she'd presented him with something much better, an opportunity to build something meaningful. I've been thinking about starting a division focused on affordable housing, she'd explained during their first official meeting, held in a conference room that probably cost more than David's annual rent. Not government housing or cheap apartments, but real homes that working families can afford. Quality construction, energy efficient, built with pride. David had listened, hardly believing what he was hearing. The thing is, Catherine had continued, I know business, but I don't know construction. I need someone who understands both the technical side and what families really need, someone who's lived it. That had been the beginning of Morrison Community Builders, with David as project manager and Catherine providing the financial backing and business expertise. It wasn't a handout or a pity job. David had to prove himself every day, learning about budgets and permits and zoning laws. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was building something that mattered. The first project had been finding the right location. David had suggested this site on the edge of town, close enough to schools and shopping, but affordable enough to keep costs reasonable. 24 houses, each with 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and modern appliances. Homes that families like his could actually afford. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor was saying from the small podium they'd set up, today marks the beginning of something special in our community. Thanks to the vision of Morrison Technologies and the expertise of Morrison Community Builders, 24 families will soon have the opportunity to own their own homes. David looked out at the crowd and spotted familiar faces. There was Mrs. Chen from his old apartment building, who'd gotten pre-approved for one of the houses. Behind her stood Tony Rodriguez, who'd been laid off from the same construction company as David and would be joining the building crew next week. But the face that made him smile the most was Lily's, bright and proud as she stood with her new art teacher. Catherine had insisted on setting up a college fund for Lily, but she'd been just as interested in nurturing her talents right now. Art lessons, music classes, field trips to museums, opportunities that David never could have afforded on his own. And now, the mayor continued, I'd like to invite the project manager, David Parker, to say a few words. David's stomach fluttered as he approached the microphone. Public speaking had never been his strong suit. but Catherine caught his eye and nodded encouragingly. 6 months ago, David began, his voice carrying across the small crowd, I thought I knew what it meant to provide for my family. I thought it was just about paying bills and keeping a roof over our heads. He paused, looking at the faces in front of him. But I've learned that providing means more than that. It means creating opportunities not just for your own family but for your whole community. He gestured to the empty lots around them. These houses we're going to build, they're not just structures. They're foundations for dreams. They're places where kids will take their first steps and families will celebrate holidays and neighbors will become friends. David's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Every brick we lay, every beam we raise, we're not just building houses. We're building hope, and I can't think of anything more important than that. The applause was warm and genuine, and David felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with money or status. This was what work was supposed to feel like. As the crowd began to disperse, Catherine walked over to where David stood talking with some of the future homeowners. She watched him explaining the construction timeline to a young couple, saw how he listened to their concerns and answered their questions with patience and expertise. You found your calling, she said when the couple had moved on. I think I have, David agreed. Funny how it took losing everything to figure out what I was really meant to do. Sometimes that's how life works, Catherine said. We have to get lost before we can find our way. They walked together toward the edge of the property where David's truck was parked. It was a new truck, or new to him anyway. Still a Ford, still practical, but reliable in a way his old one never had been. I've been thinking, Catherine said as they reached the truck, about expanding the program. There are other communities that could use what we're building here. David nodded. I've had some thoughts about that too. Maybe we could train other project managers, teach them what we've learned here. I like that idea. Build the knowledge along with the houses. As they talked, David noticed a familiar car pulling up to the site. Lily hopped out of the passenger seat, followed by her art teacher, Ms. Washington. Daddy, Lily called out, running toward them. Miss Washington brought me to see the groundbreaking. She says I can paint a picture of the first house when it's done. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Catherine said, giving Lily a hug. Over the past months, she had indeed become like a grandmother to the little girl, but in the most natural way possible. Not trying to replace anyone, just adding her own special presence to their lives. Can we go see where Mrs. Chen's house is going to be? Lily asked. Of course, David said, taking her hand. Come on, I'll show you the whole layout. As they walked across the site, with Catherine and Ms. Washington following behind, David felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible. Not because of the money or the new opportunities, though those certainly helped, but because he'd found his purpose. He thought about that snowy night 6 months ago when he'd almost driven past Catherine's stranded car. It would have been so easy to keep going, to focus on his own problems and leave someone else to help. But something had made him stop. Some voice that sounded a lot like Rachel telling him that helping others was never the wrong choice. That single decision to stop and help had created ripples that were still spreading. Mrs. Chen would own her first home. Tony Rodriguez had steady work again. 24 families would have new starts, and David had found work that fed his soul as well as his family. Look, Daddy, Lily said, pointing to a corner lot. That one has the biggest yard. Maybe they'll plant flowers. Maybe they will, David agreed, imagining the neighborhood that would grow here. Children playing in those yards, families grilling on summer evenings, neighbors helping neighbors the way communities were supposed to work. Catherine was right. He had found his calling. But more than that, he'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stop when someone needs help. You never know how that moment of kindness might change the world. One person at a time. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth where 24 new homes would soon stand. And David Parker smiled as he watched his daughter plan where the flowers should go.